1858, a summer to remember in London, though not for the delightful picnics. No, this was the year the city's river, the grand old Thames, decided to, well, get its own back. They called it the Great Stink, and let me tell you, it wasn't a marketing gimmick. For centuries, London had been treating the Thames like a magical flushing toilet that never ever backed up. Turns out, that's not how rivers work. The summer of '58 was unusually hot and dry, cooking centuries of raw sewage, industrial waste, and other unmentionables baking on the riverbanks. The smell was so potent, it was reportedly caused people to vomit and was powerful enough to halt the nation's government. Lawmakers in the Houses of Parliament, right on the river, tried soaking their curtains in chloride of lime to fend off the miasma, the foul air they believed carried diseases. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a crisis spurred by the widely held belief that bad smells caused diseases like cholera, which had repeatedly devastated the city. The sheer inescapable stench finally forced Parliament to act, where years of warnings had failed. Into this pungent crisis steps our hero, a civil engineer named Joseph Basil Jett. As chief engineer for the Metropolitan Board of Works, he was tasked with a monumental feat: fixing London's sewage problem permanently. His plan was audacious. He proposed constructing a massive integrated sewer network, over 1,100 miles of local sewers feeding into 82 miles of main intercepting sewers. These weren't just pipes, they were grand brick tunnels designed to use gravity to carry the city's waste far east of the population center, to be discharged into the Thames on the outgoing tide. The construction, which began in 1859, was a colossal undertaking, requiring 318 million bricks and the excavation of millions of cubic feet of earth. Basil Jett, a man of incredible foresight, famously calculated the pipe diameter needed for the city's population and then said, well, we're only going to do this once, and there's always the unforeseen, and doubled it. By 1875, the core of this revolutionary system was complete. It not only alleviated the stink, but also, by cleaning the primary source of drinking water, inadvertently brought a dramatic end to London's cholera epidemics, saving countless lives. Sir Chuckleton said, "So, what's the takeaway from this odorous affair? Lesson: a crisis that directly impacts the powerful, in this case, a stench so bad it made governing impossible, is often the most potent catalyst for profound and lasting infrastructure investment. Sometimes, to solve a deep-rooted problem, you first need to make sure everyone can smell it." Picture the scene. Strasbourg, July 18, 1518. It's a sweltering summer in the Holy Roman Empire, and a woman named Frau Tryphea steps into a narrow, cobbled street. But she's not off to the market. Instead, she begins to dance, fervently, uncontrollably, for 6 straight days. This wasn't a flash mob. It was the start of history's most bizarre epidemic, the dancing plague. Soon, she wasn't alone. Within a week, 36 people had joined her frantic, silent dance. By August, the number swelled to 400. This wasn't joyful dancing. It was a grotesque, exhausting spectacle. People's feet bled, their bodies convulsed, and they collapsed from sheer exhaustion, only to rise and dance again. Contemporary accounts describe a horrifying scene of people unable to stop their own bodies. The city authorities were baffled. Their first brilliant idea? Encourage more dancing. They cleared out guild halls, built a stage, and even hired musicians, thinking the dancers had to dance out a fever of hot blood. This, predictably, made everything worse. Behind this madness was a perfect storm of misery. The people of Strasbourg in the early 16th century were suffering immensely. They faced famine after a series of bad harvests, rampant diseases like syphilis and smallpox, and a deep-seated superstitious fear of divine wrath. Many believed that Saint Vitus, a Catholic saint, could curse sinners with a dancing plague.
So when Frau Tropea started, this latent fear likely ignited a fire of mass psychogenic illness, a phenomenon where extreme stress manifests as physical symptoms spread by social contagion. Desperate, the city council reversed course. They banned all music and public dancing. The remaining dancers were rounded up and taken to a mountain shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, where they prayed for absolution. By September, the bizarre plague finally subsided. Sir Chuckleton, so what can we learn from this medieval dance-off? Lesson: extreme and prolonged societal stress can shatter the collective psyche, making a population vulnerable to bizarre, shared delusions. Whether it's a dancing plague or a financial panic, fear is contagious, and the most absurd ideas can take hold when people feel they have nothing left to lose.
The Olympic Marathon, a grueling test of human endurance, a symbol of perseverance. Except for the one held in St. Louis in 1904. That one was less a test of endurance and more a 25-mile-long fever dream directed by a committee that apparently hated athletes. It was August 30th, a sweltering 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or 32 Celsius for the civilized among us. The course was mostly unpaved country roads, so every passing vehicle kicked up choking clouds of dust. And the organizers decided this would be a perfect opportunity to conduct a scientific experiment on purposeful dehydration. They provided only 2 water stops. The first man to cross the finish line was an American named Fred Lors. President Roosevelt's daughter, Alice, was about to place the laurel wreath on his head when a spectator yelled that Lors was an imposter. And he was! After about 9 miles, Lors had started cramping, hitched a ride in his manager's car for the next 11 miles, and then jogged the final few miles to the finish. The real winner then was Thomas Hicks. His trainers began giving him a cocktail of strychnine sulfate, a literal poison used as a stimulant, mixed with raw egg whites and brandy. He staggered across the finish line, hallucinating, and had to be carried off by 4 doctors. Other competitors fared just as bizarrely. A Cuban postman, Felix Carvajal, ran in street clothes, snacked on some apples from an orchard which turned out to be rotten,
forced him to take a nap. 2 runners from South Africa were chased a mile off course by aggressive dogs. Of the 32 men who started this nightmare, only 14 finished, the worst completion rate in Olympic marathon history. Sir Chuckleton, so what lesson can we salvage from this dusty, poison-fueled disaster? Lesson: ambition without evidence is just dangerous theatrics. The 1904 marathon was a deadly experiment born from a flawed theory about dehydration. It reminds us that progress, in sports as in science, requires not just bold ideas, but the rigorous, humble work of proving them safe before people get hurt.
1325. A time of great conflict, soaring cathedrals, and petty theft. We're in northern Italy, where the city-states of Modena and Bologna are about to go to war. Now, most wars are fought over land or crowns or profound ideological differences. This one was about a bucket. But the bucket wasn't the real story. You see, Bologna and Modena were on opposite teams in the great Italian Super League of the Middle Ages, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. Bologna was Team Guelph, backing the Pope. Modena was Team Ghibelline, backing the Holy Roman Emperor. For years, they had been raiding each other's territory. Then, one fateful night, some cheeky Modenese soldiers snuck into the city of Bologna. They didn't sack the treasury. They went to the central well in the main square and stole the public bucket. It was a preposterous, calculated insult. Bologna was furious. They demanded their bucket back. Modena naturally said, "Come and get it." In November of 1325, Bologna marched out with a massive army of over 30,000 men. Modena, led by the Ghibelline warlord Passarino Bonacalci, could only muster about 7,000 soldiers. The two armies met at the Battle of Zappolino. On paper, it was a laughable mismatch. In reality, it was a slaughter. The Modenese pursued them right to the gates. But instead of laying siege, they simply camped outside the walls and held a mock Palio, a festival with games and races to add insult to injury. And of course, they kept the bucket. In fact, that very bucket is still on display in Modena to this day. Sir Chuckleton, so what's the lesson from this bucket-based brawl? Lesson: the silliest of symbols can become the most potent catalyst for conflict when deep-seated animosity is already simmering. The war wasn't fought for a bucket. The bucket was the excuse they needed to fight the war they already wanted.
Gather round and let me tell you about a war, a great war, fought not with tanks and dreadnoughts, but with grit, determination, and 2 machine guns. The enemy? A vast, feathered army that could run at 30 miles an hour. We are in the Campion district of Western Australia in 1932. The world is in the grip of the Great Depression, and Australia has a problem. A 20,000-strong problem. A legion of emus, driven by drought, has migrated and discovered a paradise, the newly established farms of World War I veterans. These farmers watched in horror as the giant, flightless birds devoured and trampled their precious wheat crops. They were desperate. So they did what any reasonable group of ex-soldiers would do. They petitioned the Minister for Defense, Sir George Pearce, for machine guns. And unbelievably, he said yes. Enter Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery, dispatched with 2 soldiers and a pair of Lewis machine guns. The first engagement took place on November 2nd, 1932. A flock of about 50 emus was spotted. The soldiers opened fire. The birds, however, proved to be surprisingly brilliant tacticians. Instead of panicking as a group, they split into smaller units, running erratically, making them incredibly difficult targets. A later ambush failed when one of the guns jammed. After a brief withdrawal and a fair bit of public mockery, Major Meredith and his men returned on November 13th.
This time, they tried mounting one of the guns on a truck. The reality was a chaotic, bumpy pursuit where the gunner couldn't land a single shot, and the truck couldn't even keep up with the birds. By the end of the campaign in early December, Major Meredith reported using nearly all 10,000 bullets for fewer than 1,000 confirmed kills. He noted with a grudging respect that the emus had, for all intents and purposes, won. Sir Chuckleton, so, what can we glean from this feathered fiasco? Lesson: when humanity declares war on nature using the tools of conventional warfare, the result is often a humbling farce. The Emu War of 1932 shows that brute force is a poor substitute for understanding an ecosystem, reminding us that some problems can't be solved with a machine gun.
Industrial ambition. In Georgian London, bigger was always better. We're on Tottenham Court Road at the Horseshoe Brewery, a titan of industry famous for its porter. To keep up with London's thirst, they built a wooden fermenting vat that was over 22 feet high. Think of it less as a barrel and more as a 3-story building full of booze. On the afternoon of October 17, 1814, a worker named George Crick noticed one of the 700-pound iron hoops had slipped. This had happened before, so his supervisor told him to simply make a note of it. No harm would ensue, he was told. An hour later, with a catastrophic crack, the vat exploded. The force of the initial blast triggered a domino effect, destroying other casks and unleashing a tidal wave of between 128,000 and 323,000 gallons of porter. The brewery's 25-foot-high back wall disintegrated, and a 15-foot-high wave of hot, fermenting beer crashed into the St. Giles Rookery next door. This wasn't a party, it was a disaster zone.
St. Giles was one of London's most densely populated and impoverished slums. Families, many of them Irish, lived in cramped, squalid basement tenements. The beer tsunami smashed into these fragile homes, collapsing walls and flooding cellars in moments. Tragically, 8 people were killed, mostly women and children who were in their homes at that time of day. In one cellar, 5 people were killed while attending a wake for a 2-year-old boy.
Next tackle, teenager, the legendary SS Beer. Don't go away.
Let's talk about a tsunami. But forget water. I want you to imagine a 25-foot high, 160-foot wide wave of molasses. This isn't a bizarre fantasy. It was the reality in Boston's North End on January 15, 1919. The source of this colossal sugary catastrophe was a colossal steel tank, 5 stories tall, built by the Purity Distilling Company. It held over 2 million gallons of crude molasses, which the company was racing to turn into industrial alcohol, a key ingredient in munitions manufacturing, which was booming even after World War I. But this tank was built on the cheap and in a hurry. The company's own records show they skipped basic safety tests, like filling it with water first. Local residents, mostly Italian and Irish immigrants, complained that the tank groaned, shuddered, and leaked so badly that children would collect the sweet drips in cans. The company's solution? They painted the tank brown to hide the streaks. On that unseasonably warm January day, the temperature rose rapidly. As the fermenting molasses inside expanded, the poorly built tank could take no more. With a sound like a machine gun barrage, the steel rivets popped and the tank's walls ripped apart. A monstrous wave of molasses weighing 12,000 tons was unleashed. It was powerful enough to smash buildings, buckle the elevated railway tracks, and toss vehicles into the harbor. The sheer viscous force was devastating. People and horses caught in the flow were either crushed by the debris-filled wave or, horrifically, trapped and suffocated. The company, United States Industrial Alcohol, tried to dodge blame, initially claiming the tank had been blown up by anarchists, but this led to one of Massachusetts' first major class action lawsuits. Colonel Hugh Ogden concluded unequivocally that the tank had failed because of its structural defects. The company was found liable. Sir Chuckleton says, "So what is the lesson from this uniquely sticky tragedy?" Lesson: the Great Molasses Flood is a brutal, tangible example of the cost of deregulation and corporate negligence. It was a disaster built rivet by rivet, a sticky reminder that when profits are prioritized over basic engineering and public safety, the public ultimately pays the price. National pride is a funny thing. It can build empires, inspire art, and in 1859, it nearly started a war between 2 global superpowers over a pig. We're on San Juan Island, a lush piece of land nestled between the mainland United States and Vancouver Island. The problem stemmed from the Oregon Treaty of 1846. The treaty set the border through the middle of the channel, separating the continent from Vancouver Island. The cartographers, bless their hearts, apparently missed that there are 2 channels, the Haro Strait and the Rosario Strait. Depending on which one you chose, San Juan Island was either American or British. Our story kicks off on June 15, 1859, when an American farmer named Lyman Cutler found a large black pig rooting around in his potato patch for the umpteenth time. Having had enough, Cutler shot the pig. The pig, it turned out, belonged to a Hudson's Bay Company employee named Charles Griffin. Griffin was furious. Cutler offered to pay him $10. Griffin demanded $100. The situation escalated dramatically when British authorities threatened to arrest Cutler. The American settlers, fearing British legal or not-so-legal action, called for military protection. The U.S. Army dispatched Captain George Pickett, yes, that Pickett, of future Gettysburg fame, with a company of 66 soldiers. In response, the British governor of Vancouver Island, James Douglas, sent 3 Royal Navy warships to the area. For over a month, a tiny US Army garrison and huge British Navy ships faced off against each other. The tension saw soldiers on both sides taunting each other and devising new insults. The only casualties of the Pig War were a few animals shot by soldiers and their self-respect.
Army detachment was stared down by one of the most powerful navies on Earth. The local commanders on both sides, thankfully, showed remarkable restraint. When news of this porcine powder keg reached Washington, D.C. and London, officials were horrified. President James Buchanan sent General Winfield Scott, the Army's top commander, to de-escalate. He and Governor Douglas negotiated a temporary solution, a joint military occupation of the island, which lasted for the next 12 years. Finally, in 1872, the two nations agreed to let Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany arbitrate the dispute. He chose the Haro Strait, officially making San Juan Island part of the United States and ending the Pig War with 0 human casualties. So what's the lesson from this barnyard border dispute? Lesson? When national ambitions are tied to poorly defined boundaries, any small incident, even a dispute over a pig, can be magnified into a crisis. The Pig War is a perfect, if absurd, reminder that the path to peace is often paved not with grand victories, but with careful maps and calm negotiators.